I'm Alan Bourne at Ommati, and I'm delighted to share this latest podcast with you. In today's session, we'll be looking at innovation in GenAI in talent assessment. And I'm delighted to introduce Simon Defoe, Global Talent Assessment Manager at Vodafone, to share his thoughts and experiences about his work in this space. So, Simon, welcome. And could you just tell us a bit about yourself and about the work you're doing at Vodafone in this area?
Thanks for having me on. So I'm Simon. I look after all things talent assessment related at Vodafone, and that sits across our selection type assessments, what we do for high volume roles, so early careers, frontline type stuff, all the way up to what we do for senior leadership roles, and we sit across selection and development. So a small team, but kind of critical to Vodafone's work in this space. Probably our key areas at the minute really focusing on. One is really around frontline hiring. So when I talk about frontline, I mean our contact centers, our retail type hiring, our early careers, and particularly our leadership populations as well.
Yeah, so in a way, the full scope across the organisation, which
exactly
certainly gives us plenty to talk about. I guess as we know, sort of AI is very much talked about across industry more widely at the moment. There's a lot of thinking going on in sort of our area around it. What's your approach been in Vodafone to thinking about Gen AI and how you might adapt to it or adopt it, or etc.?
Yeah, particularly so if I'm speaking specifically about the assessment and hiring space, really for us, a lot of our approaches, we use a lot of AI already. That's been ongoing even before kind of ChatGPT and those types of things have come out. So that includes things like our ATS doing skills matching based on CVs and rating CVs and matches to roles. We've been using AI for some of our early career stuff, so particularly around our recorded video interviews. And at the minute, really, I think our approach is more around experimentation. So what tools are out there that we can pilot, that we can experiment with, and kind of keeping an eye on the market, I would say, what's coming, which I think is an exciting space. Probably the things front of mind that I think are coming over the next 12 months will be around particularly how we support hiring managers, around interviewing. So maybe probing for interview questions, summarizing feedback and notes for candidates, and also around feedback for candidates as well. So actually, can we give them tailored reports and more tailored tools for candidates to be able to read through their reports with some kind of digital assistant, let's say, to support them as well.
So I'm sort of hearing in that how can we augment the experience, whether it's hiring managers or for candidates, right, to make it better than it is at the moment, or more tailored perhaps.
Exactly that. And I think particularly augmenting it for hiring managers to begin with for us, but equally for candidates, how they're using it now, but actually us need that really, rather than just knowing candidates are doing it somewhere. How do we lean into it?
Yeah. In one of the topics in this area, which is kind of, again, much talked about, is the future of work itself. So what's your sort of sense in the different role families you were describing about how work itself might be changing and how that might have implications for how you assess?
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict longer term, let's say, but I think over the next few years for us, what that's going to most likely mean is a lot less kind of routine tasks happening in the workplace. A lot of that, obviously, as we know, being replaced with AI-based tools. But I think what that does mean for us in terms of the skills or the behaviors we're looking for is going to be a lot more about that human side of things. So people's empathy, their ability to build rapport, their critical thinking. So all of those things really are the things that I think we're going to have to lean into more and more. And I think that also means from an assessment perspective, there's going to be a lot more human assessment. So a lot more hiring managers or assessors taking the lead to really assess that in a way that actually right now, GenAI probably can't do in the same way. How you feel about our relationship and things like that. So assessing those things.
And there's an interesting subtlety there, I guess, to your point, isn't it? That a lot of the behaviours that you were describing are very uniquely human behaviours, which I guess is logical as technology allows us to do more routine things more effectively. The value that you're looking for in hiring is people that can demonstrate those human behaviours, right?
Exactly that. And I think there will obviously be the more technical stuff that comes out of all of these changes as well. So that digital savviness, that ability to use AI and things like that. And some of those bits, you might be able to do with more automated type assessment approaches.
In terms of being a skills-based organization, linked to some of the things you said earlier, what's that looking like in practice for you at Vodafone?
Yes, I suppose there's a broader, which isn't for today, a broader question about how we define a skills-based organization and skills hiring, for example. But I suppose in terms of where we're at the minute as an organization, I think we touch on a lot of skills-based hiring and skills-based organization type methodology. We've got like our skills taxonomy that we've had for a few years. We've got our skills area of L&D focusing on actually what are the skills we need to make sure we've got the right learning development in place for, and also building on that, making sure that we've got the right programs around reskilling or skilling people, whether that's people at risk of redundancy or making sure we're developing the skills that we need internally. In terms of in the hiring space, where that sits quite a lot at the minute is around, like I was saying, around our ATS, doing that CV screening and assessing skills through that way, but then also through our interviewing techniques with hiring managers. Our methodology essentially in terms of how we hire is around, we're looking at people's behaviors that are crucial for Vodafone. We're looking at their potential. And then the third element we're looking at is actually, have they got the skills relevant to the job or the business area that they're looking for. So that's how we operate it at the minute. But I know there's a broader debate of how we could define it, how we could do it.
But that sounds like you're trying to kind of integrate it in a slightly more holistic way of assessing, if I'm hearing that correctly.
I think so, yeah. I think, ultimately it's one aspect. You could argue that, the behaviors or potential is also a skill, like you could argue,
sure.
right? So yeah, so we're looking at those three angles.
Interesting. So that's and clearly there's some strategic sort of thinking about what skills are needed in the future, but operationalizing it's always a lot harder than the grand idea, right?
That's the biggest challenge, I think, for us. You can think we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of skills like other organizations do once you're into the granular. So I think for us as an assessment team, it's which ones do we provide the tools to assess against in a kind of standardized, centralized way where we know there's consistency, versus what do we say, actually, this is unique to your role or your area. You as a hiring manager can assess for that or can decide how you're going to assess for that.
Understood. No, that makes sense. And if we move on to I suppose almost sort of the defensive side of Gen AI, there's obviously been lots of discussion about how candidates are using Gen AI to do more applications or to sort of help them pass different types of assessment. What's your current sort of thinking and position around that side of things?
Yeah, again, it's a personal opinion actually, but I am an advocate of us letting candidates use Gen AI. I kind of see as for us as an organization and the society more generally, we're saying actually you need to be able to use Gen AI to support your productivity at work, or even support you outside of, I don't know, if you're on holiday and you can't speak the language, I could use ChatGPT to ask somebody a question for me. So actually you need to be able to use it to be productive, to get by in life. So I kind of think actually it would be weird then if we were saying to candidates applying for, you're not allowed to use it at all, because, actually then we're not really assessing or bringing people in with the skills or the savviness to use it that we need. Equally, I appreciate it's probably a bit more nuanced than that. And there are times where we need to say, hey, as a candidate, we don't want you to use it, whether we want to assess your pure reasoning skill, let's say, and not the answers ChatGPT gives you, or we want to be able to assess your answers to certain questions that aren't generated by ChatGPT. So generally, I would say we advocate because actually we see the importance of Gen AI as an organization.
Yeah, so that sort of aligns with the calculator theory of the issue, which is if it's normal to the flow of work, we probably need to find a way to reshape a bit what we're doing to accommodate it, right?
Yeah, exactly that. I do think obviously there is a need as well for us to go, actually, when are we saying actually this is where we don't want candidates to use it, and then we need to be able to monitor and restrict the cheating, and probably learn from the education sector there and how they do a lot of that.
Yes, exactly. There's a whole piece around how to sort of proctoring without it being too invasive to consider as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so if that's the defensive side, if we then move on to sort of the innovation piece, and you alluded to it earlier, from your perspective in the organization, what are the main sort of drivers for innovation? Like, is they around experience or effectiveness of prediction, efficiency? What are the things that you
Yeah, I
would like
think
to make better by having more innovation over time?
I think that's a really interesting one because I think sometimes the goal becomes integrating AI or Gen AI rather than actually what's
Yeah.
the
What's it
actual
for?
goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's probably one of the few places you can say in talent assessment space, I don't think the goals of what we're looking for have changed as such. We want a great candidate experience. We want to improve efficiency in our hiring processes. We want more inclusive processes and we want to get the
Yeah.
best people for the job
Absolutely. Yeah.
and however you measure it. So I think those goals in terms of what we're looking for is still exactly the same. And that's
Yes.
where we start going, okay, how do we innovate? Whether that includes AI, Gen AI or not.
Yes. And what do you think the opportunities are? And I mean here probably for the industry more widely over time to sort of, innovate in that space. You mentioned around feedback and things, but what about in assessment itself?
Yeah, I think there's so many areas across the board. I think probably the key, probably where I think the industry, the assessment industry is at the minute, I think is a relatively disappointing space. I think if I compare it even just to wider HR, where I see lots of Gen AI type tools coming in. And even then you take highly regulated, and I mentioned already, you take highly regulated sectors like healthcare and you say, well, actually they're improving loads of patient outcomes through implementing Gen AI or AI. And we're really struggling and saying we can't do it because of X law and Y law. And I struggle
Absolutely.
to see
Yeah.
how more regulated industries can
Yeah.
do.
You take healthcare is obviously quite important to get right from that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then if going back to kind of the assessment space, I think probably the key areas where I think there's lots of value that can be added quite quickly is around that augmentation that we're talking about. So from a candidate experience, how can we make assessments more interactive? How can we help them still be authentic, but use Gen AI to help tailor their answers, tailor how they respond to things and how they respond to scenarios? Then I think also from a candidate, really creating real world based scenarios, linking back to the skills bit. Actually,
Yeah.
we can use Gen AI to really assess skills more accurately for candidates and for
Yeah.
organizations. So I think that's one part. The second part for me is then around that hiring manager augmentation piece. How do we help hiring managers interviewing, probing, having accurate and fair notes, even creating their own potential interviews and case studies and exercises
Absolutely.
and things like that, actually in a way that historically we would have said you need a OxPsych or somebody trained in assessments to do that.
Absolutely.
Actually us really leaning into, we can give the hiring managers the tools to do that themselves now.
Yes, and so there's an element of that making the hiring manager really being the customer because they're going to end up managing the individual who's hired, right? So clearly that really focusing on that's important. Yeah.
But those would be my things that I would be thinking the industry should be doing over the next 1 to 2 years. And then I think there's also lots of things longer term.
Absolutely. No, that's really, really useful to sort of paint a really practical picture of what would make a difference. And as you said, link it back to the goals. So if you were to give sort of just a final takeaway, one piece of advice for others who are looking to innovate around talent assessment, what would your piece of advice to them be?
Yeah, I think if it's for people in an internal role like mine, I would say really just think about the big picture, find somewhere to start small and scale. Obviously, this is all contextual depending on where your organization is at. And I think if I reflect on the last few years at Vodafone, what's made the biggest difference is us starting so we started with our assessments for our leadership population and actually taking that as an area where we would know we would get the most advocacy from leaders across the business if we got it right. And that's now kind of bearing fruition, let's say, and having a good impact when we want to do stuff in other spaces because we've got kind of a collection of advocates across the business.
Fantastic. Simon, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your experiences, which I'm sure will be very, very valuable for the audience. Yeah, look forward to sharing this with the wider group to get comments on. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Al. Thanks for having me.
All right.